Welcome back, lovely ladies. If you want to become the woman of your dreams, make sure to hit that subscribe button and like this video. And join our Patreon for even more exclusive content. Now, let's dive into today's story.
She pulled into a small parking lot adjacent to a budget-friendly hotel in Peterborough, feeling an odd mixture of excitement and trepidation flutter in her stomach. The day had been full of sales meetings, business calls, and forced small talk. Now it was early evening, the sky drifting toward a gentle mauve. She checked her phone once again, scanning the messages that had led her here. Peter's comments on her photos had been different, polite, almost old-fashioned in their courtesy. She was used to younger admirers and their more direct proposals, which could be strangely flattering, but never what she truly wanted. She knew she had spent most of her life searching for something deeper, though it took her quite a while to realize what that might be. She brushed her fingertips across the steering wheel, recalling the polite words he had written. "You look beautiful. I wish I was there, holding you. Very attractive legs." These were phrases that made her feel seen in a way she had rarely experienced. She told herself she wouldn't put too much hope into any one encounter, but Peter's thoughtful tone set him apart. Something about him hinted at genuine kindness. 10 minutes later, she stood in a quiet corridor on the hotel's second floor. She was booked for just one overnight stay, part of her route as a traveling salesperson. In her suitcase waited an assortment of items that she took great care in hiding from colleagues and family members: delicate undergarments, a black pleated skirt, a couple of dresses, and a blonde wig. Having to keep such things concealed for decades was her reality. She stepped inside the small room, switched on a lamp, and took a quick look around. A standard, tidy space with one bed, a small desk, and a television. This was the sort of place she stayed in a few times a week, quietly grateful for the freedom it afforded her. When she was in her 20s, she had discovered her lifelong draw to certain clothes, fabrics, and a sense of presentation. Yet she had lived as David most of the time. That included going to work, paying the bills, marrying, and raising 2 children to adulthood. It meant wearing men's suits, shaking hands in boardrooms, and pretending everything felt perfectly normal. But the need for an alternative expression never vanished. She had tried to fight it. She had told herself it would go away if she busied herself with raising children and juggling daily responsibilities. But her innermost longing remained. Decades later, her situation at home had deteriorated. Her wife, now well past midlife, had little interest in being intimate, to the point where any conversation about affection ended in argument or avoidance. Their partnership had slowly lost its color, so David, when traveling alone, became Davina. Private moments in hotel rooms were a solace, giving her space to appreciate a part of herself that rarely saw the light of day. She opened her suitcase and began laying out her clothes. She had already made arrangements to meet Peter at his house, some miles away. They had both agreed she would come dressed in her usual business suit and then transform in private before stepping downstairs to greet him. He seemed considerate of the fact that she might prefer a bit of privacy during that crucial change, a gesture that felt respectful. She selected the pieces carefully. A smooth black slip that could fit under just about anything, a pair of lace-top stockings she adored for their gentle caress against her skin, and a knee-length black dress that looked understated but made her feel polished. She had a thin suspender belt to hold the stockings in place. That had been something she saved up for, just to add that extra layer of elegance. She paused before putting on her shirt and tie for the drive, feeling a wave of relief knowing that later she would get to be Davina in someone else's home, something that she was both anxious and thrilled about. Before leaving the hotel, she freshened up. She rechecked her reflection, making sure no hints of her secrets were visible under the gray blazer and slacks. She had a second bag with her that held everything she needed to become Davina. She zipped up, slid her phone into her pocket, and left for Peter's address. The drive to his home took about 15 minutes through quiet roads lined with tall hedges and well-tended trees. The house, when she found it, was elegantly understated, set back behind a low stone wall. A large old oak tree stood near the driveway, its branches heavy with leaves. The place itself was 2 stories, made of pale bricks, and perched in a tidy neighborhood that felt neither cramped nor ostentatious. She left her car near the gate, inhaled deeply, then rang the doorbell. When Peter answered, his eyes immediately lit up as though he had been genuinely looking forward to this. He was older than she was, but carried himself with natural grace. His white hair was carefully combed, and he wore simple dark slacks and a button-up shirt. He was tall, over 6 feet, and his posture seemed to speak of confidence and warmth in equal measure. "Davina, David?" he asked softly, glancing down at her simple business suit. She offered a shy smile. "David for the moment, yes. It's nice to meet you in person." "Come in, please," he said. His voice was gentle but deep, and he stepped aside to let her cross the threshold. The foyer led into a spacious living area that opened to a corridor and a wide staircase. The house smelled of subtle cologne and an unmistakable cleanliness. He guided her upstairs, pointing to a large bedroom with a door at the end of the hallway. Inside that bedroom, there was another door leading to a small, private bathroom. It already had some towels waiting on the counter. She noticed, with quiet gratitude, that Peter must have gone out of his way to ensure everything was comfortable for her arrival. "You can dress here," he said gently. "Take your time, and when you're ready, come down. I'll be in the living room." She murmured her thanks. Once he closed the bedroom door, she set down her bag and paused to let the moment sink in. She was standing in a near stranger's home, about to transform into the person she felt truly represented her. Her heart began to race with excitement and nerves all at once. After locking the door, she removed her blazer, shirt, and tie, revealing the silky undergarments she had slipped on at the hotel. A subtle thrill ran through her when she saw herself in the bedroom mirror, wearing black lace beneath an otherwise plain suit. Next came the makeup, a more practiced routine than it used to be. She had grown adept at it over many solitary nights in hotel rooms. A bit of foundation to even her complexion, some subtle shadows around the eyes, mascara to make her lashes appear fuller. She brushed a gentle rose color onto her cheeks. It wasn't much, but it brought out the features she wanted to highlight. She put on the black dress she had carefully chosen. It had short sleeves, a modest neckline, and a gentle flare just above the knees. Combined with her blonde wig, a style with light waves that brushed her shoulders, she felt neatly put together. She opted for a pair of low-heeled shoes, mindful of the fact that she didn't want to appear too tall next to Peter. Her reflection filled her with a cautious optimism. She wondered what sort of impression she would make when she walked back downstairs. With one final breath to steady herself, she stepped into the hallway. She made her way down the sweeping staircase, taking care not to trip. Her heels clicked softly against the polished steps. The living room opened up before her, a high ceiling, tasteful furnishings, and an enormous television mounted on the wall. Peter stood near a sofa, but as soon as he saw her, his expression brightened. "My goodness," he said, voice warm with admiration. "You look even better in person than in the photos." Her cheeks flushed with both delight and a hint of embarrassment. She moved carefully, sitting down opposite him on a comfortable chair. She smoothed the skirt under her thighs and reminded herself to keep her knees together. Old habits from a lifetime spent mostly in men's clothing made it a constant effort to maintain the posture she wanted. "Thank you," she replied, voice soft. "I wasn't sure how this would go, so I appreciate your hospitality." He gave a gentle nod. It's my pleasure. Would you like tea or coffee? Coffee, white, no sugar. Certainly. I'll be back in a moment. While he was gone, she surveyed the decor. Framed photos of smiling faces, perhaps relatives, and furnishings that suggested a neat, comfortable life. He seemed like a man who enjoyed his quiet routines. She noticed a pair of reading glasses on a nearby side table. A crocheted blanket was folded neatly over the back of the sofa. There was a sense of stability here, something she lacked in her own home life. Peter soon returned with a small tray. On it rested 2 steaming mugs of coffee and a single red rose. He placed one mug before her, then handed her the rose with a gentle smile. "For you," he said. "I felt it was the right thing to offer." She looked down at the flower, stunned. Nobody had given her a rose before, at least not like this. Her eyes grew wet with sudden emotion. For a moment she couldn't speak. "I'm sorry," Peter murmured, worried he had somehow upset her. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." She quickly shook her head. "No, it's not that. I've never been given a rose in this way." She swallowed hard. "It makes me feel appreciated." Peter's expression softened. He set the tray down on the glass-topped coffee table and rested his hand lightly on the chair's arm. "I'm glad. You deserve to feel that way." After taking a moment to recover, she inhaled the scent of the rose and set it aside, admiring its color. The two settled into an easy conversation. She told him about her life as David, the traveling salesperson, who lived with a wife who had lost all interest in warmth and closeness. She admitted she suspected her wife had taken a companion, but there was a point where she felt she couldn't blame her. Their marriage had hollowed out. Then she opened up about her childhood. She recounted how she used to gaze enviously at dresses and ribbons her classmates wore when she was a kid. She said she never felt she could speak of it. Over time, it only took root more deeply. She told him about wearing her wife's undergarments in secret, with a mixture of guilt and relief. Peter listened intently, nodding. Finally, he shared his own background. His wife had passed away a couple of years prior. He had married young, he explained, largely due to social pressures from family members who guessed about his real preferences. He had loved his wife for her companionship and gentle spirit, but there was no genuine spark in their bedroom. She had taken her own lovers, discreetly, and they had kept a respectful distance from each other in that realm. Now, free of family expectations, he felt he could explore what he had repressed for so long. "Finding your profile," he said, "felt like a stroke of luck. And then seeing your photos, reading your words, I was taken with you in a way I didn't think possible." His tone was solemn yet warm. "I don't mean to overwhelm you with that. It's just how I feel." She reached out, placing a hand on his arm. She felt that sense of kind understanding deepen between them. Her life had been a tangled web of responsibilities and secret yearnings, and here was someone who seemed to stand outside of judgment, offering acceptance of everything she was. Leaning closer, she caught the scent of his cologne, woody, with a slight sweetness. It was comfortable, in the same way an old sweater feels on a chilly evening. Their eyes locked, and he slipped an arm around her, pulling her gently into a half embrace. She hesitated for only a moment before letting her head rest on his shoulder. "There's something I never expected in all this," she whispered. "Some part of me is drawn to you, truly drawn." He kissed the top of her head softly. "I won't rush anything. I do hope you feel safe." She breathed in relief. Safety had always been her priority. In her earlier attempts to meet men who admired crossdressers, she had encountered rough, pushy behavior. Her boundaries hadn't always been respected. The last thing she wanted was to be cornered again. With Peter, though, a sense of calm spread over her. "Thank you," she said. They talked for another hour, sipping their coffee and laughing softly at moments in their respective histories. It amazed her how swiftly she felt at ease in his presence. The living room's lamplight created a soothing glow as twilight gave way to evening outside. Eventually, Peter set down his mug and said, "Perhaps we should move somewhere more comfortable." He gestured to a larger sofa in the living room. "It's better for conversation, and I don't want you to feel perched on the edge of that chair all night." She agreed, and once they sat side by side on the plush couch, she felt more at ease than ever. He slid an arm around her, and they shared their first tentative kiss. It was gentle, an unhurried meeting of lips that felt both unfamiliar and deeply natural. She could almost feel some barrier within her mind dissolving. They drew back slowly, looking at each other in that lingering hush. Her cheeks felt warm, and she realized she was smiling, really smiling, in a way that reflected genuine contentment. She didn't want the moment to end. Peter spoke in a low voice. I hope that was all right." She nodded, eyes shining. "Yes, more than all right." He pressed a second, briefer kiss to her forehead. "I'm glad. It's been a long time since I've felt this way, and I want to treasure it." They let the silence around them expand into a restful bubble of companionship. Finally, she drew a slow breath and asked, "Where do we go from here? I don't know if you were thinking about something long-term, or if you just wanted someone to spend time with on occasion." He took her hand in his, interlacing their fingers. "I've given it some thought," he said, eyes steady on hers. "I'm not a man who thrives on short-lived encounters. I've spent decades suppressing who I am. Now I want something real. I want to build a life with someone." He paused, perhaps measuring how his next words would sound. "I'd like to offer you a chance to stay here with me. It doesn't have to be just a couple of days. It can be a permanent arrangement if you wish." She blinked, unsure she had heard him correctly. "Stay here? For good?" He nodded. "Yes. I mean, of course that would require changing your entire life, but we could work that out. I have enough resources to address practical concerns. The question is whether you're open to it." Her heart thudded in her chest. "That's a lot to consider. I have a mortgage, a wife, a job, responsibilities." "I understand," he said softly. "But if you truly want it, those things can be arranged. I've done well for myself financially. I could help settle your mortgage, even assist your wife if a quiet, amicable separation is the best path." She gave a shaky laugh, dazed. "It sounds unreal. Is that even possible?" He squeezed her hand gently. "I can't promise it'll be easy, but it's possible." He paused, holding her gaze. "If you chose to live here, I'd want you to feel free to be the person you are inside. It would mean dressing as you wish at all times. You'd never have to hide your wardrobe again. You could fill the closet upstairs with clothes. In fact, my late wife's clothes are still here. They're well kept, and many items might fit you. I'd want you to take on the role you've always wanted." She froze, her mind reeling at the enormity of it. That would be living as a woman all day, every day. No more suits, no more hiding. A tremor laced her voice. "That's my dream," he said gently, "but it's your decision." The sofa cushions seemed to swallow her up as she tried to form a coherent response. She felt an excitement that was almost dizzying, yet it was tempered by the knowledge that leaping into such a situation could be risky. She was thinking of her wife. Though their marriage was fraying, it was still a bond of many years. She thought about her adult children. She thought about the job that, while not thrilling, had kept her afloat for decades. Yet Peter was offering something she had yearned for, the chance to live fully, to let her outside match the person she felt inside. A tear escaped down her cheek, and he wiped it away with his thumb, not unkindly. "You don't have to answer right now. he added, seeing the conflict in her eyes. I understand the magnitude of it. Still, the words tumbled from her mouth before she had time to weigh them further. I want this. I want to be with you. He sighed in relief, gathering her closer. She melted into the comfort of his embrace, letting the living room's peaceful hush settle around them again. They decided to talk specifics the next morning. He would drive her back to her hotel where she could return the rental car or arrange something with her company. Then she could start figuring out the first steps toward a separation from her wife, if that was the path she indeed wanted. She could look into paying off the mortgage. Peter would offer financial backing. In return, she would be free to walk away from the secrecy and burdens that had weighed her down for far too long. For the rest of the evening, they kept the conversation gentle. They shared more about their families. Peter had no children, but plenty of close relatives and friends who supported him. They both laughed at silly anecdotes from their past. When the sky outside turned midnight blue, she realized how late it was. Would you like to stay here tonight? He asked in a quiet voice. I have more than enough room. She hesitated, not because she didn't want to, but because it felt so new. I would, she finally agreed. It feels right. He nodded, then led her upstairs, guiding her to a cozy bedroom with soft lighting. The bedspread was a deep maroon, plush and inviting. She peeked around, noticing that it was indeed set up for a guest. Fresh towels folded at the foot of the bed, a small lamp on the nightstand. I'll let you settle in, he said. If you need anything, I'm just down the hall. She caught his hand before he turned away. Would you stay with me for a while? Maybe we could talk more? His gaze flickered with understanding. Of course. They entered the room together, and she set her small bag on a chair near the dresser. She removed her wig, carefully placing it on a makeshift stand. She took off her shoes and rubbed her ankles, grateful to be free of the low heels, at least for the night. He sat on the edge of the bed, watching her with a gentle curiosity, as though he couldn't quite believe she was real. She approached, and he reached for her hand again, pulling her near. They spoke for a time in low voices, discussing their hopes and worries with an honesty that felt rare. She admitted her fear that once the newness wore off, maybe he would change his mind. He insisted that his longing to share a life with someone of her unique spirit wasn't a passing fancy. She told him how old she felt sometimes, how she'd lost so many years. He reassured her that it was never too late. Finally, drawn together, they embraced under the softly lit lamp. She felt enveloped by warmth, both emotional and physical. The sense of calm that followed made her realize how long she'd been tense and anxious about these matters. They decided to sleep separately that night, agreeing it might be best not to rush intimacy. She secretly felt relieved. She had experienced fleeting encounters with men in the past who scarcely cared about her comfort or emotions. This time, she found a tender consideration that seemed both refreshing and profoundly moving. He bid her good night with a gentle brush of his lips against her cheek. After he left, she settled into the cool sheets, heart alight with cautious optimism. The next morning, she woke to a soft light streaming through thin curtains. She yawned and stretched, momentarily disoriented by her unfamiliar surroundings. Then she recalled everything that had happened, and she felt a mixture of excitement and quiet nerves course through her. She slipped into the adjoining bathroom, washed her face, and did what she could with her minimal travel makeup to present Davina again. She chose a clean blouse and a skirt from her bag, pairing them with her stockings. She also had a thin cardigan that covered her shoulders. She glanced in the mirror, feeling a sense of contentment, though her mind raced with the life-changing decisions ahead. Downstairs, she found Peter in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. The smell of coffee and toasted bread filled the space, giving it a cozy morning atmosphere. He turned, greeting her with a warm smile. "Good morning, my dear," he said, gesturing to a small table by the window. "Please, have a seat." She blushed at the endearment. "Morning," she murmured, taking a chair. Outside the window, she could see a patch of garden with blossoming flowers. A light breeze rustled the leaves of the old oak in the yard. It was peaceful, reminding her of something she might find in a countryside bed and breakfast. He set a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of her, then poured fresh coffee. "I hope you like eggs. I'm not exactly a gourmet cook, but I manage." She smiled. "This is lovely. Thank you." She took a moment to savor a bite, relishing the simple pleasure of a home-cooked breakfast in a place where she felt safe. When they finished, he walked her to the sofa, where they began making concrete plans. The day would start by returning her to the hotel, so she could notify her manager that a personal situation had come up requiring her immediate resignation or an extended leave. She felt hesitant about burning professional bridges, but the prospect of truly living as Davina full-time overshadowed her doubts. Once that was settled, they would make a stop at her home, if she felt it was time, to begin the dialogue with her wife about finalizing matters. The tension in her chest grew at that thought. Her wife wasn't oblivious to the strain between them, but the conversation about finances and separation was still daunting. Peter placed a reassuring hand on her knee. "I'll be there with you, though I don't want to intrude where I'm not wanted. We'll find a way to make it as smooth as possible." She nodded, grateful for his kindness, but still anxious about how her wife would react. They agreed they'd sort out the details one step at a time. Despite the seriousness of their discussion, a certain lightness remained between them. After they cleared the table, he showed her around the house, pointing out a dining room with a large oak table, a study lined with tall bookshelves, and a neat conservatory filled with potted plants. The final stop was a locked door at the end of the upstairs corridor. "This was my wife's dressing room," he said quietly, unlocking it. "After her passing, I just couldn't bring myself to sort through everything." He pushed the door open. "If you do decide to move in, you can look through these clothes, take what you like, and maybe help me with the rest." She stepped inside, gazing around at racks of dresses, suits, and neatly boxed shoes. There was a faint scent of lavender sachets. A vanity table stood against the wall, mirrors ringed with small lights. Although the emotional presence of the previous occupant was evident, she felt a subtle excitement. This was a trove of possibilities. The idea of being free to wear these items, day in and day out, felt surreal. Peter's voice was subdued. "She and I lived more like companions than lovers, and we used separate bedrooms for many years. Even so, the memories are still here." She placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Thank you for trusting me enough to show me." He managed a small smile. "She was a wonderful person, and I think she'd have approved of us finding comfort with each other." They lingered there for a few moments, letting the silence carry whatever unspoken emotions fluttered between them. Soon they locked the room behind them and returned downstairs, where they finalized the plan to drive to her hotel. The air outside felt brisk and refreshing as they walked to his car, a reliable-looking sedan. She felt a swirl of feelings: resolve, worry, anticipation. A single red rose still rested in a small vase on the coffee table, reminding her of the newness of this connection. During the drive, she found herself stealing glances at him, noticing how at ease he looked behind the wheel. For a man of 62, he had a vitality she admired. His shoulders were broad, and the lines on his face told of years of wisdom and experience. She felt unaccustomed to the surge of admiration she harbored for him, partly because she had always pictured herself as the caregiver, the doer, but here was someone who wanted to take care of her too. They arrived at the hotel, and Peter waited in the car while she checked out of her room. She carried her packed suitcases back to the trunk of his sedan. Soon they were on the road again, heading in the direction of her house. The city streets gave way to suburban neighborhoods, and tension built in her chest with each passing block. She had phoned her wife earlier, indicating she needed to discuss urgent matters that afternoon. Her wife had sounded wary, but agreed to be there. The closer they got, the more unsure she felt. She worried about confrontation, about possible anger, about heartbreak. But she also remembered Peter's gentle promise of a life free from concealment. They parked on the street to avoid causing any scene in the driveway. Before getting out, Peter reached over and took her hand. "You can do this," he said. She exhaled, shoulders tight. "Yes, I have to." She stepped out, bracing herself. Peter waited in the car, giving her the lead to decide if she wanted him to come inside or remain outside. She approached her front door, keys in hand. The home was a modest, semi-detached structure on a quiet residential street, thoroughly lived in and maintained on the surface. Inside, though, the emotional climate had been stifling for years. Her wife greeted her at the threshold with a guarded expression, arms crossed over her chest. "What's this about, David?" she asked, skipping any pleasantries. She glanced back at the sedan. She could see Peter in the driver's seat, though he wasn't peering over. "It's serious. May I come in?" Her wife stepped aside, letting her pass. In the living room, a smaller space than Peter's, cluttered with old magazines and half-finished knitting projects, she took a seat on the couch. Her wife stood, refusing to relax into a chair. She began, voice unsteady. "I can't keep doing this. We've grown apart, and I think you know that as well as I do. I found an opportunity that might allow both of us to move forward." She took a breath. "I want a separation." Her wife's face registered a series of emotions: surprise, hurt, maybe even some measure of relief. "Why now?" "Because I can't pretend anymore. It's been clear we aren't happy together, and She paused, trying to decide how much to reveal. "I've met someone who can give me a new start." Her wife's voice hardened. "So you're just leaving?" "I don't want to leave you with nothing. There would be a settlement, money for the house, more than enough to keep you comfortable. I have an associate who can arrange the mortgage payoff. We can—" "Who is this person?" her wife demanded. "Since when have you been involved with someone else?" She tried to steady her breathing. "It's all new, but it's real, and I'm tired of secrets." The conversation continued in tense bursts. There were accusations, tears, and some arguments over finances. But the shape of it all was undeniable. She was done. The final straw was the revelation that the distance between them no longer felt bridgeable. When her wife asked if it was just about physical closeness, she shook her head. "No, it's about the fact that I feel different, have always felt different. I have never been open about who I am in this household. I can't be David anymore." She hesitated, then carefully added, "I want to be seen as a woman, full-time." Her wife's mouth fell open slightly, but she said nothing. Perhaps some intuition had told her something wasn't quite typical in their marriage. Perhaps not. In any case, the conversation ended with the sense that while it wasn't a pleasant outcome, it was final. She handed over some documents that Peter had prepared, with the promise of a substantial settlement if her wife would grant a swift, discreet divorce. In a whirlwind of emotion, she left. She carried with her only a few personal belongings that she'd need immediately. Everything else, her daily clothes, her shoes, felt irrelevant now. She returned to Peter's sedan, trembling. He opened the passenger door from inside and gave her a concerned look. "Are you all right?" he asked. She nodded, though tears welled in her eyes. "It's done," she managed to say, sliding into the seat. "I'm free." He put a comforting hand on her shoulder, then started the car. They drove away, leaving behind a chapter of her life she never truly fit into. The next few days were a blur of logistics and emotional upheaval. True to his word, Peter covered the mortgage costs and offered her wife a generous arrangement. She made phone calls to her children, both now in their 20s, explaining that she and their mother were separating. She didn't delve into the deeper reasons, not yet. She only assured them that she still loved them and that she was sorting out her life. They were both surprised but didn't berate her. They promised to check in and see how she was coping. By the end of the week, she was officially living with Peter. At first, the enormity of it felt dizzying. She spent her days exploring the house, learning its nooks and crannies, cooking meals, and, as promised, going through his late wife's clothing. Some outfits fit her wonderfully. Others needed adjusting or weren't her style. She set aside a few of her new favorites: silky blouses, knee-length skirts, a couple of summer dresses with floral patterns. Peter had also insisted she shop online for some items that were distinctly hers. She moved into his late wife's dressing room, turning it into her own space. There, she'd experiment with makeup and hairstyles, and each evening, she'd join Peter for dinner in the dining room, wearing the clothes she loved without shame. They'd talk about everything: past regrets, future plans, daily trifles. She felt a sense of belonging that she had never felt in her own marriage. One afternoon, she hesitantly brought up her desire to do simple house chores while dressed as she pleased. She worried it might seem subservient, but Peter smiled kindly and said, "If that's what you want, do it. I'm not here to confine you to chores, but if dressing that way while cooking or cleaning makes you happy, I support it." And she realized that was precisely what she wanted. She took real pleasure in tidying up, dusting the large living room, vacuuming the plush carpets, and then greeting Peter at the door, wearing a soft dress that allowed her to feel lovely in her own home. She felt no shame in that role. Rather, there was a gentle satisfaction in it. Over time, her fear that the novelty might wear off began to dissolve. Peter's affection showed no sign of waning. He'd come up behind her as she washed dishes, wrap his arms around her waist, and rest his chin on her shoulder. He'd praise the meals she cooked, even if they were simple. He'd notice every new outfit she tried on, every minor change in her hairstyle, and always comment with thoughtful admiration. Then came the day she discovered a box of old photographs in a closet. They were pictures of Peter in his younger days, along with his wife and other friends. He was nearly unrecognizable, tall, slim, and wearing 70s-era suits. In many pictures he wore a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, as though putting on a show for the camera. She saw group photos from events, one or two from a wedding, and a few where his wife stood next to him in a flowing gown. That evening, she asked him about them. He let out a quiet sigh. Those days feel like a different lifetime. She and I functioned more like siblings, honestly. We cared deeply about each other, but I was always thinking about men. It was just that we grew up in a time when it was unthinkable to be anything but the traditional husband and wife. She listened, resting her chin on her folded hands. "It must have been lonely." He gave a crooked smile. "It was. But it's all in the past. I hope we can both live differently now." He kissed her forehead, then lingered to study her face. She felt her heart flutter. Their closeness had begun to deepen in small, meaningful ways, but she knew a part of her was still shy about physical intimacy. She remembered how rough her previous experiences had been with men who didn't respect boundaries. Peter, however, never rushed her. He never demanded anything. One night, after they'd watched a film together in the living room, she found herself resting against his side on the sofa. The credits rolled. The lamplight was low. She felt a sudden wave of affection. Turning to him, she said, "I want to be close to you." Her voice was trembling with both anticipation and vulnerability. He took her hand, brushing his lips against her knuckles. "I feel the same. Are you sure you're comfortable?" She nodded. "Yes." Then he rose, gently pulling her up with him, and they walked upstairs, hand in hand. Inside their shared bedroom, lit only by the soft glow of a small lamp, they faced each other. She touched the collar of his shirt, unbuttoning it slowly, and he helped remove her cardigan, taking care not to tug or hurry. They embraced under the calm lighting, sharing gentle, unhurried closeness that set every nerve humming without the slightest hint of aggression. They spent the night together, learning each other's warmth and presence. It was a moment of tenderness that made her feel more cherished than ever before. The details remained private, handled with mutual respect and genuine compassion. Nothing was forced or taken for granted. She awoke the next morning tangled in soft sheets, sunlight streaming through the curtains, and felt a sense of wonder that this was her new reality. In the days that followed, life found a gentle rhythm. Mornings brought shared breakfast by the kitchen window. Afternoons might be spent on errands or reading quietly while Peter handled some of his financial affairs in his study. Evenings were a time for cooking dinner together or occasionally going out to try a local restaurant. She had never felt so unburdened and alive. News spread gradually among their acquaintances. Some people who knew David from business circles were puzzled by the sudden departure from the job. Her children, once they had the chance, visited. They were surprised to find their parent living in a new home, presenting in feminine attire. Though the conversations were initially awkward, they eventually expressed that what mattered most was their parents' happiness. They were adults now, building lives of their own, and while the transition was jarring, they didn't deny her the peace she sought. Peter's extended family was a different matter. A few older relatives, upon learning of his new companion, shook their heads in disapproval. Others welcomed her warmly, appreciating that Peter was no longer living in a self-imposed loneliness. Over time, most came around, if only for his sake. Finally, on a mild, sunny Saturday, Peter found her in the garden, tending to a small array of potted plants that had once been neglected. She turned, brushing hair from her face, a smudge of dirt on her cheek. He approached, gently wiping away the smudge with his thumb. "You've done wonders out here," he remarked. The once overgrown corner of the yard was now vibrant with flowers and tidy shrubs. She grinned. "It's actually fun, once you know what you're doing." He slid an arm around her waist. "You know, I've been thinking." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Yes? I'd love for us to formalize our arrangement. Not in a legal sense necessarily, but maybe we could have a small ceremony. Invite your children, a couple of my relatives, a few friends who support us." Her heart skipped. She thought of the short, official ceremony that had bound her to her wife years ago. This would be entirely different, something done out of genuine devotion. She blinked back tears. "Do you really want that?" He nodded. "I do. I've never felt more certain." He placed a soft kiss on her forehead, and she closed her eyes, absorbing the contentment of this moment. He was offering her, in essence, a life free from the shackles that had weighed her down. She looked up at him, heart full. "I'd be honored," she whispered. They stood there in the gentle garden sunlight, imagining a small gathering, perhaps in that very yard, where they would exchange vows of companionship. A new life chapter built on genuine understanding and affection. It didn't matter if others found it unconventional. For the two of them, it felt profoundly right. And so the days went on, each one reinforcing her choice to leave behind the illusions she had maintained for so long. Every glance at the rose he had given her that first evening, now preserved, its petals dried and framed in a little box, reminded her how a single act of courtesy could open a door she never believed she had the courage to step through. The quiet sense of belonging was all the proof she needed that she had finally arrived in the place she was meant to be.
Did you like the story? Hit that like button and tell me what you thought in the comments. Do you want to hear more stories? Subscribe and hit the bell. For exclusive content and early access, check out our Patreon. You can find the link in the description, or you can watch any of the videos shown on my right. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.